We're back with more now on the president's claims that a deal to end the war with Iran could happen as soon as this weekend. An Iranian official telling MS Now that things are, quote, moving quickly, all as key national security surveillance powers are set to lapse on Capitol Hill. And joining us now is New Hampshire Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen, the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, thanks so much for taking the time. President Trump, once again, is saying a deal with Iran is imminent, that coming hours after he had threatened more strikes and after days of uncertainty. An Iranian official telling us this morning things are moving quickly. Senator, do you believe a real agreement is actually close, or is this just more of that same merry-go-round of starts, stops, and shifting signals?
Well, it's hard to know. Obviously, we've heard this from the president multiple times. But I think the real question is what would be the details that would be included in this deal? And so far from what we've heard, it doesn't address any of the goals that the president had laid out at the beginning of this war. So we have a more hardline regime in place in Tehran. It doesn't address proxies, groups like Hezbollah and Hamas that have been funded by Iran. It doesn't address, it's not clear how it would address their nuclear stockpile, and whether, from what's being reported, it would not be any better, in fact, probably worse than the deal that President Trump pulled the United States out of in his first term. So we really need to see what the details are.
Right, and the details are under discussion still, it appears, and Iran and the Trump administration are not aligning in what they're saying is in this agreement. So we are also working to find out what the details are. Meanwhile, FISA is set to expire in just hours. This provides the key surveillance authorities for the intel community that we've discussed. Democrats refusing to extend FISA in protest of Trump's pick for acting DNI, Bill Pulte. Senator, we're in the middle of the World Cup. There are multiple events tied to America's 250th anniversary, not to mention the war with Iran. How concerned are you about FISA powers not being in place?
Well, I do think we need to reauthorize FISA. I've been a supporter of that and supported the reforms to FISA in 2024. But it's hard to believe that FISA is and the law will be operated in a way that protects the privacy of American citizens when President Trump has put in place somebody who has a record of having been part of the retribution that the Trump administration has had against Americans. So I don't think he has no national security background that's required by the law. He has already shown that he's not an actor that we can trust. And so it's unfortunate that the president was so cavalier about putting in place somebody at the top of the effort to maintain the security of the United States who knows nothing about national security and intelligence.
I assume you're talking about Bill Pulte, who was put in this acting DNI role, although the president now says he's planning to nominate for the permanent position U.S. Attorney Jay Clayton to become the DNI. Would you support Jay Clayton for DNI?
Well, I want to hear more about him. Obviously, he has national security credentials. He's headed the Southern District of New York. He was the former headed the Securities and Exchange Commission. He's been an attorney for a number of years. I am a little concerned that he has also supported election denying and the Trump position that the elections in 2020 were rigged. I think we don't want somebody at the head of this as the ODNI who has had those opinions. He's also come out in support of this slush fund, the $1.8 billion slush fund, and the agreement with the IRS. So I think he has some questions that he needs to answer, but he seems to have the credentials that are required for the job. And I look forward to the Senate having a hearing on his nomination. And it begs the question about why didn't President Trump nominate somebody like that in the first place? Bill Pulte has had opposition from both Democrats and Republicans because he is just not qualified.
Yeah, if Jay Clayton does get that bipartisan support, gets confirmed, does that mean the FISA rules could quickly be put back in place?
I think so. And I think I'm sure that the Senate, I certainly am ready, and I'm sure my colleagues in the Senate are ready to come back to Washington to get that nomination acted on as quickly as possible and to get FISA addressed.
Senator, affordability, of course, remains a major concern for Americans right now. Consumer prices jumped in May for the third straight month, leaving U.S. families and businesses to suffer the sting from the war with Iran. And against that backdrop, you have now introduced a bipartisan bill to cap insulin prices at $35 a month. It seems so hard to get anything passed right now in Washington, but you have gotten a lot of bipartisan support for this, as I understand it. Why do you think it's resonating?
Well, because we have about 8.5 million Americans who don't live unless they have diabetes, because if you have diabetes type 1 and some forms of type 2, you need insulin to survive. And insulin is a life or death product. I have a granddaughter who has type 1 diabetes, so I've seen firsthand the challenges that her family has faced. And this is legislation, as you point out, it's bipartisan. We have 13 Republicans and 13 Democrats. Senator Susan Collins and I are partnered on this legislation, along with Senators Warnock and Kennedy. It would cap the cost of insulin for everyone who has health insurance at $35 a month. We did that 2 years ago for Medicare. It's been a huge success, and we need to do it for everyone. It would also set up a pilot program for people who live in certain states that don't have health insurance, so that they could get the cost of their insulin capped as well. Diabetes is the most expensive chronic disease. We hear from Americans that one of the costs they're most worried about is the rising costs of health care. This is a way for us to put in place something that's going to help address those rising costs in a way that will serve millions of Americans. It has strong bipartisan support. We should be able to get this done.
Senator Jeanne Shaheen, thank you for shining light on that legislation. We'll be following it, and thank you for being with us today.